Welcome back, guys. It's Israel. In the last video, I talked about the microservices architecture. What is it? Why you would use it? And how to select what would be a service. And I promised you guys that in the future, I'd show you guys how to deploy your .NET API as a microservice using Docker and then hosting it in Azure. Well, the future is now, so let's get into it. But right before we jump into the video, I want to quickly shout out my channel members. If you want to see your name here, as well as get access to all the code for all the videos on my channel, click the link in the description or join button on my profile. But now, let's get into the video. So we already know about .NET and Azure. But how do we actually containerize our application? Well, we're going to be using Docker. So I'm quickly going to go over anything from the microservices video that you guys may or may not have watched. Just a quick recap before we actually dive into what is Docker. So just a quick little recap about the microservices architecture, which is the thing that actually uses containers in different places to then all come together and make an application. So it is, again, a pattern that divides your application into a collection of smaller microservices that all communicate, and it's highly maintainable and testable, as well as it is loosely coupled. So every little service is in its own little environment. You can make changes to the given microservice and it doesn't affect all the other pieces. Again, your app, if one piece of the app goes down, the whole thing doesn't crash. You can make updates and create little teams to work on different parts of the app, and it just makes a more modern, different approach to creating apps. So now what is Docker? Well, Docker is more than just a little whale with blocks on top of it. It can automate the deployment of applications as a self-sufficient containers that can run on the cloud or on site. Docker can create these containers with the exact base software needed to run exactly what you need, so they are more lightweight than VMs. These can then be saved as templates for later use. They can run on almost any OS, cloud, or servers, and a container is the packaging of software code with just the OS and dependencies to run in a lightweight exe that runs anywhere. So the main point is that Docker containers are extremely lightweight because they only really use exactly what the app needs to run, right? They don't have any of the other fluff that you might have in a VM. They are very, very focused on only exactly what's needed, and they can run anywhere, right? So that's a lot of the benefits of it. So like I said, Docker is going to create these containers and then store the instructions, which we're going to see later in the Dockerfile, is basically all the instructions to create this very specific image. And then you can just be like, oh, hey, I need that for something else. Well, here you go. Here are the instructions. So that's what Docker is really used for. So like I just mentioned, what is a Dockerfile? Let's dive a little bit deeper. So to build your container image, this is the file that's needed, and inside of it are all the commands that are needed to build the image. For .NET and Visual Studios, you can add it when creating a new project or by right-clicking the solution, and then you can just go down to add and then add Dockerfile, and then it'll be like Linux or Windows, but we'll see that later because I'll show you guys. And then some common commands are from, arg, add, copy, run, and environment, which again, I'll show you guys when I show you a Dockerfile. And the command docker build is how you actually build an image from your Dockerfile, like in terminal or wherever you're gonna run the command. So this is going to be a quick little tiny example, just kind of showing you guys how to create a Docker container. You start with a Dockerfile, which is kind of what's shown right here on the right. And then you're going to build the Docker image using Docker build. And then you can just do Docker run, and that will run so you can like locally test the image, right? And that basically creates a Docker image for you to have. And then you can use that image to send it to whatever container that you need. So now that we have this container image, right? Now what do we do with it? Well, we want to send it to Azure. And again, we will see this a little bit later once I do the project, but let me walk you through the steps verbally. So you're going to create the image by running a Docker build. Then you create a container registry in Azure. And then whether you're using VS Code, or going to the Azure portal, you should be able to see this container registry. And then you are going to publish your Docker image to that registry. Once it's in the registry, you then go ahead and create your Azure App Service or Azure Container app as well. So either or, whatever you want to do, then you are going to push that image that's in your registry and put it into that app service. And then you will have your container running in that app service, and then you are ready to go. You should be able to navigate to the URL for whatever you're trying to do with it, and it should be up there. But now, I've talked about it enough. Let's get into the project, and let me show you how it's done. Alright guys, so now we're at the project part. So first I'm going to show you guys how you would add in Docker from the very beginning if you were creating a new project. So you would select kind of like this web API, go here, let's just say sample. I'm not going to end up using this API. but I just want to create it for this example. So then you would go into here, you would select your framework, and then you would select enable Docker, and then you would just select what OS you want your Docker file for. So I'm assuming you would have, Windows and Linux. So click that. And then you're going to see that when you create this project, it's just going to have the Docker file from the beginning, where obviously if you don't check that box, you're not going to have it. So moving this over, we should be able to see that we have this Docker file right here. We select it and we can see that we have this Docker file here. And we're going to walk through it in a second, but not for this project. But that's how you actually create it from the beginning, so that you just always have Docker enabled there. So you would do it right here. But if you did not have Docker here, so let's just say you didn't do this, you would right click here. You would go down to add. You would then come down to Docker support. So you would do, again, add, Docker support, and then you would just select like Linux or Windows, and you would press OK. And then it would create you this file right here. But since we already have it, it's not going to create it, but that's how you would add it in if you already have a project created. So this is the project we're actually going to use. It is an API I use for a lot of my .NET 8 stuff. It just has some get Pokemon, create Pokemon, edit Pokemon, delete Pokemon. Again, it was for previous videos, and it contained things about Pokemon. And it's basically just a regular CRUD API, nothing too crazy. But the goal of this video is to essentially see this in Azure when we actually deploy our Docker image to Azure, right? So this is the end goal that we want to get to. But now let's progress into the Dockerfile and everything that you guys need to know about that. All I did was basically go ahead, right click, I clicked add, and I added Docker support. So I have this Dockerfile right here. So we already have it right here. I didn't change anything from what's created automatically. So let me just go through what is going on right here. All right, guys, so let's go through the Dockerfile that's been created for us. So at the top here, we're gonna have the from, and then we're going to look at here. This is where our .NET Docker image is going to be pulled from. And then we're going to set the working directory for the next instruction. We are then going to expose 2 ports, so 8080 and 8081. Moving down here, we're again pulling from the same .NET Docker image. And then we're going to set an argument. So it's going to be like a variable. And we're going to set it to build configuration equals release. Again, we set our working directory to source. And then we're going to go ahead and copy the CS project file, and then we're going to .NET restore, so restore our NuGet packages. That's what's happening right here. So we're going to run that command, .NET restore. We then copy, and then again set our working directory to the source .NET API YT, which is this project file. And then we're going to do a run .NET build, and then we're going to build the CS project. Our release configuration is what's set in this, so here to here. And then app build is where it's being sent to, and that is the output flag. And now we get to this step. In this step, we basically are taking a build from up here, and we want to set it as publish. So we want to publish a release build. So again, we set the configuration, and then we're just running a command, .NET publish, our CS project file, and then we take the release build, and we have our output. Now, finally here, what we're doing down here is we're basically setting the entry point to our container. So we take our build, we set the work directory, we copy some stuff, and then we set the entry point as where do we want, or what do we want our container to execute, the DLL. And then that's basically all this configuration file is. This Docker file is not super duper complicated. Obviously, if you had more instructions, you could slot them in. And the way that a Docker file is executed is it goes one at a time. So each level. It's basically like a stack of pancakes. One, then another, then another, then another. They all get executed down this specific line. And you'll see it when we actually run the Docker commands. That is how it's executed. So you would just add in more things if you wanted to customize or do more things in your Docker container. Okay, so if you guys have not at this point installed Docker Desktop, the next step for you guys is you need to get Docker Desktop. You need to see something like this on your computer. And let me give you guys a link of where you guys need to go. So if you guys are running this on Windows, then obviously you guys need to go to somewhere where you can download the Windows version of it. So in my case, it was docs.docker.com/desktop/install/windows-install. So that's where I went ahead and downloaded the one for Windows. Once it installed and did all of that good stuff, then I was able to see the little whale with the blocks. And then you'll see something that looks like this, and it should be empty. And let me just show you guys, you might run into this specific error when you're trying to open up Docker Desktop. And let me show you guys what it is and how to fix it. So when trying to open up your Docker Desktop, you might see an error like this, where container features are disabled. And then it gives you this command that you need to do in PowerShell. Well, you can just take that exact command, and then let me show you what to do. What you're going to do is you're going to open PowerShell, and you're going to run it as an administrator. So yes, you want to run it as an administrator. And then you're going to want to run that exact command here. Enable Windows optional feature -online -feature name Microsoft Hyper-V containers. Oh, that basically turns on containers so that you can actually use them within Windows 10, I believe. So maybe other versions a little different. I just know that this is the error that it gave me whenever I was trying to run this, and that's how I fixed it, running this exact command. So at this point, go ahead and create your account. If you don't have an account, go ahead and do that, right? Once you have an account created, now just look out for this green bar down here. Once you have a green bar, that means that Docker is running and you should be ready to go. And now you can actually use all the Docker commands for building, running, whatever you want to do. So let's get into that. So let's just test if Docker is working. So right click my solution. We're going to open a terminal here. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to do Docker run hello world. Essentially, what this is going to go out and do is it's going to try and run the hello world container image in Docker, but we're not going to have it installed. So since we don't have it installed, Docker is going to go out and look for that image, that template. It's going to go out there and look for that template, download it, and then run it. That is something that you can do with your Docker images. Like I said, they are templates that then you can use at other moments, right? So in this case, this hello world one is the image that I want to use. But we have to go look for it and bring it back. So you could do that with your other containers, right? Your other apps later on down the line. If you wanted to just reuse that image really fast, you already have this template set up because the Dockerfile is that template, right? It is that set of instructions to create exactly the image that you want with all the dependencies that you need. So let's see what happens here. I do not have hello world, I believe. So let's see what happens. It couldn't find it is what it's saying right here. So it goes out and pulls the latest. So now let's scroll up here. So now let's go into what happened when I ran Docker run hello world. We see that we were unable to find image hello world latest locally, obviously because I haven't done it. I haven't used it. So we need to go and find it. So we then go and pull it down. Once we finish pulling, then we see that it actually runs the image and it says hello from Docker right here, which is again the hello world version for Docker. So now that we were able to pull in that hello world image and run it, we should be able to pull up our Docker desktop and see that we have it in our images. So now that this one's there and this was just a sample, now let's actually take this Docker file in this .NET API. Let's do a Docker build. Let's create an actual image from this so that we can prepare to actually send it up to a container and shove it into Azure. So let's figure out how do we actually do a Docker build. So just again, make sure guys that you have Docker desktop running at all times. If not, you can't do any Docker things. I ran into 2 errors when I was doing this in preparation for the video. I'm going to show you guys what the errors were and how I fixed them, just so you guys know in case you guys run into those errors and I just don't breeze through, right? Like if I didn't run into any errors. So let's show you guys the command that I had to run to actually build this image. So what I had to run is something like this. The command, and I'm going to throw it obviously on the screen, is going to be docker build -t .NET 8 API YT. .NET API YT is essentially just the name of the image, and that's what's going to pop up in your Docker desktop once it executes. And then we are basically just -f, and then we're sending the path to the Docker file, and then the dot for the execute. So we press that, and we're going to see that it's going to start running. It may take a little bit longer for some of you guys on the first time, but just be patient. If nothing happens, something eventually will happen, right? For better or worse. All right, guys. So my Docker build command finally finished running. So let me walk you guys through everything that happened. Essentially, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to run through the Docker file and execute every single one of them. So again, it's just going to start pulling the parent container image for .NET. It's going to work down from the work directory, exposing the ports. And then again, it got to the .NET parent image. And then when it gets there, it's going to go pull the .NET SDK. So it has to go do that. So as you can see, pulling, downloaded the new image. And now we're getting to this right here, the configuration. Again, copying, running. And this is where it's trying to do the NuGet package restore. So it is this one right here. So that is where I ran into my first bug whenever I was trying to do this. So let me show you guys the error that I was seeing there. So the error that I saw was when it was doing the .NET restore, it was unable to actually do the NuGet stuff. So this is the fix for it. Basically, you have to go into your settings. You then, I believe, go into your Docker engine, and you have to set this DNS. So once I set this, and then I applied and restarted. So I set this DNS, and then this little array of 111, 1111, 8888. And once I did this, that fixed that error, and the NuGet packages were able to restore correctly. So that was one fix for this specifically. So then you're going to have this restore. You're going to be copying, and then again, work directory right here. It's going to run that, and then it's going to run the build. And if at any point you have a copying error, so it says something like this, file not found in the build or excluded from the Docker ignore, you can do two things. You can go into your Docker ignore file, which if you expand your Dockerfile, click your Docker ignore and see if you're not ignoring one of these for some reason. I doubt it, right? Most likely what you're going to need to do is just make sure that you're in the right place when you're running these commands, right? So make sure that you're not like in the project, or you're in the, like, just make sure you're not in the wrong place trying to run these commands, and then you have the wrong path. So obviously it's not going to find the stuff where you're telling it to. So just make sure that you're running your commands from the right place, and that'll fix that error if you just can't find it. Just do your best to figure out what the appropriate path is. But you know, if you execute adding the Docker from a certain place, make sure you're then running the commands from that exact place, right? So that'll be the best thing for that. So once you restore, copy, then you run your .NET build, then it just continues to publish. Eventually you're going to get down to, again, you're doing this .NET publish, get all the way down to the bottom after your entry point to your app. After you do your entry point to your application, then at the very bottom, you successfully built that container image, and it's going to say .NET 8 API YT, because what? That was the name that I gave it right here on the -T. And then you should open Docker Desktop, and you should be able to see that it's right here, and it was just created. So it is this .NET 8 API YT is my container image locally, right? But we want to get it to Azure. So how do we do that? First, we need to go and create a container registry. All right, guys, so I am at the Azure portal, and I'm ready to create my container registry. So I already have my Azure subscription ready, and I have my resource group created. So if you guys don't have either of those set up, go ahead and set those up and then come back. But I'm going to go and do a container registry. So click that. We're going to do a create. Now I'm just going to select my resource group. I'm going to just enter literally anything. So let's do Docker API YT. And we are just going to set the location. South Central US is fine. Let's just do basic, because this is a tutorial video on YouTube and I don't want to be charged like an enterprise. And let's just go ahead and review and create, and I'll be right back once it's done. So now that our container registry has finished being created, we now need to take our image that we've already built and push it up here. So how do we do that? Let's go back to our project. We're going to right click here, go down to publish. And now what are we publishing today? Well, what are we? So we're going to do this Docker Container Registry. That's where we are publishing to. We again click Azure Container Registry. Next. And then if you aren't signed into your Azure, you might have to sign into your Azure. And if you are signed in like me, you should be able to find my resource group in here. And this is our Container Registry. You need further proof. Container Registry. Container Registry. Now you click it, click Next. And we are doing Docker Desktop because that's where our Docker image is. And click Finish. It's going to create this profile for you, this publishing profile. And once you have that, all you have to do is click Publish. So what essentially happens whenever you are pushing to your container? So essentially in here, we are grabbing our image and we are pushing it to a container in Azure inside of this Azure Container Registry. So once you actually press Publish, what it's going to do is it's going to rerun that Docker file. So it's again going to run this Docker build, and it's going to do all the stuff that we already saw whenever we did our build. And then once that's finished, it's actually going to then push it up into the Azure Container Registry. And it'll go through this whole thing, pushing to the repo. And then it'll tell you that it was pushed with the Docker image with the tag latest. So now let's go check out our Container Registry and see if our stuff is there. So now that it's finished being pushed, let's go find it in our container registry. So we're back here, go to your repositories, and you should see that you have that image in here, ready to go. You should see that it's latest. It was modified at 48. It's 5:50 now, so it's been 2 minutes. But we are here, and now we can see it. So now it's in this container. It's waiting for us. But now this container is just sitting here. It needs to go somewhere. And for that, it needs to go to an app service. So we need to go ahead and create an app service and then tell it to go grab this container so we can show it off for everyone to see in that URL. So now we need to go to app services. We need to create an app service, create a web app. And now I'm just going to do the same resource group. Let us just do .NET 8 Docker API. Thank you. And then right here, instead of usually using like code, right? Whenever we're doing just a regular, project, we're actually going to do container. And then since we did Windows as well, we select this. And then what we're going to need to do is go next. You would need to create a database. So my API would go to a SQL Server database. So for me to actually get something back from my endpoints, I would then need to go and create my SQL Server database within Azure. I'm not going to do that in this tutorial, but you guys would need to set that up. It's really not that difficult if you know how to use SQL, which is why I'm not covering it in this tutorial, but you would need to set that up if obviously your API talks to something. It goes within its own container. It needs to have its own database. So I'm just going to create an empty SQL Server. Obviously, my API is not going to pull back anything, but that's what you would select if you were using SQL Server, and it'll create the server and the database for you while it's creating this. And then I'm going to go to the next step, and this is the important one. You need to say where your image is coming from. So you would click this. You're going to say from your container registry, and now you find it. So you have your registry here. OMG. Why am I not able to access my image? Well, it's because you didn't give it permissions. So what you need to do is go back to your home, go back to your container registry, and you need to click here on access keys, and you need to say that you are an admin user essentially. So that allows you to basically be able to actually access your images. So now you can go back, recreate your Azure app service. So go back here. We again select all this stuff, go back here, .NET 8 Docker YT, hopefully that's still available. Click container, Windows, go down here. I'm just gonna select premium because it's again a tutorial, Docker, database, and now we get back to Docker, Azure Container Registry. And now as you can see, we are actually able to select that image that we created originally right here, right? This one that we then push to the container registry and is now popping up in Azure when we are trying to select our registry. So now with that access, so in case you guys obviously get that same error that I was seeing that you don't have access, that's what you have to do. You have to go set yourself as an admin. And now when you come here, you are able to see your registry. And now you see that image, tag latest. And now, you can review and create, and I'll be right back once it's done. And while our container is being deployed to the app service, if you guys are finding this video helpful, please drop a like on this video so it spreads to more developers on YouTube, as well as subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the other lovely content that I have for you guys. So now that our app service has been deployed, let's go check it out and let's see if everything's working as it should be. So our container image should be published correctly. So right here, we can see that we got it from our container registry and we have a publishing model of a container. And now let's check out what's here. So obviously right here, this is an API, so it's not going to have a beautiful front end, right? But how do we fix this? Well, originally I told you guys, I wanted to just see the Swagger UI for the API that we had running locally. But now all we need to do is do this and we should be able to see it again. So let's tack on Swagger to the end of this. So Swagger index.html, and we should be able to see that Swagger UI for our .NET 8 API. And as we can see, we have all our endpoints here, just like we did in our project back here. We have that in Azure. So that was deploying that same Docker image all the way from our local to the container registry to our Azure app service. And now we have it right here. And if we hooked up a SQL Server database and then, took our backup and threw it up into Azure, we would be able to run this endpoint and get our Pokemon from the database. But that is how you guys can take your .NET 8 API, use Docker, containerize it, and then take that container and throw it into Azure for the world to see. And if you guys enjoyed this video right here, check out this video to learn a little bit more about microservices, and check out this video for maybe the next one in the series.